So, entering the temple of surrender. I often, when a new topic comes to me, I don't immediately know why, but something feels right about it. I suspect it has something to do with my life as much as anyone's life. But when the topic joy came, or excuse me, the topic I forgot wonder came last time. Um, I felt right. Feels like following it with surrender. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll talk my way into clarity about that. I think of it as the topic of the other half of life. We're such a doing culture. Culture is so much oriented around what can be accomplished through effort, what can be achieved. It's very much oriented around competence, sort of like what do you have to show for your life seems to be important. And yet, this isn't all of life, really isn't all of life. There's another side. There's relaxation, for one, and there's receptivity, simple witnessing. There's yielding sometimes to circumstances. There's undergoing things. To say it even more strongly, I imagine that in all of your lives, there's some component right now in which you are undergoing something. And by that, I mean, there are the things that we have chosen to do and we want to do. Um, and then there are all the things that kind of happen to us or circumstances evolve. So suddenly we're in them and they're not necessarily what we would have chosen or what we desire. And nonetheless, we're there. And so I think that life is as much what we undergo as it is what we undertake. It's both. It's not one or the other, but it's both. And so this is a chance to really examine and see what is skillful around this quality of life where we are undergoing things. And for some reason, the word temple, it was suggested to me actually by another situation, another place. And it just struck a chord. There's something about thinking of this aspect of life as a temple, as someplace holy that one enters. Felt immediately that was helpful because honestly, left to myself, to my own aversive mind, so much of what is in the undergoing category of life, gets a kind of a big yuck. Um, and so a shift in attitude seems helpful. And the word temple I found helpful. But I think that the goddess of surrender can be a very fierce goddess, even as she can be so generous and lead to some of the most beautiful things. There's a fierceness there. To give an example that's fairly trivial, but quite immediate, before this class, we're house sitting for a friend that I grew up with. And he's off traveling and we're here by ourselves. And, one of the smoke detectors was beeping. And, and turns out I went to a drugstore. I could have gotten the battery the very first day we were here, but I ended up forgetting that among getting some other things. So today I went right before the class. And I got there and all the batteries seemed to be sold out. It's like this entire display was just empty of batteries. And I went, oh, there's this kind of like, oh, how can this be? there's almost a feeling of like some sort of injustice. Like you go there and the rack is supposed to be full, right? That's why these stores exist. The rack's supposed to be full. And and then lo and behold, I discovered that way up in the corner, sure enough, there's a packet of 9-volt batteries, but I have to buy a whole packet of them, and I only need one. So there's like, oh, I don't need to buy a whole packet. And so as these things happen, it helps that I'm teaching these classes, because suddenly my mind says, I think this is a moment to surrender, Mark. Surrender to the fact there aren't a lot of choices. Surrender to the fact that I'll have to spend more money than I need to. It's not like I'm somebody pressed for money the way many people are. And it's not as though there aren't, tons of other stores that I could go to. This is, like the United States of consumption. So you can usually get what you want. But there was just kind of a moment there of, okay, what would it be to just surrender here, surrender to reality? Okay, I could go somewhere else. I don't have a lot of time. I don't even know how far that would take me. Why don't I just get this? I can give the people we're house sitting for some extra 9-volt batteries. Everything's fine, and then I talked with the clerk. I said, did you find everything? So I said, well, no, I didn't actually find a single pack of a 9-volt battery. He said, yeah, the truck hasn't come in yet. It's sort of like, it is what it is. It is what it is. And so, a lot of the moments of surrender that we deal with are quite minor. There are some major moments of surrender. And I believe we'll probably hear about some of them here. But much of life, there are these minor moments of surrender. And sometimes they're mixed with the possibility of agency. You're not completely without agency. And but once in a while, you are completely without agency. And that's a whole different situation. So this is really where we're going. And so the fierce goddess, who is the goddess of the Temple of Surrender, she asked that we lay down our weapons to come into the temple. And what do I mean by weapons? Just name a few of them. I think one of them is our expectations of things, that things be a certain way and we know how they should be, or our demands upon a situation, that we be served in some way. I also needed to get sunglasses. And as I was there kind of looking at the sunglasses, this woman came through and she was just incensed that the Easter candy wasn't on sale. There's this whole rack of Easter candy. And so when it's not you, you can see more easily the absurdity of it. And the clerk came over and said, oh, it is on sale, and she actually didn't listen to the clerk saying it is on sale because it wasn't marked on sale. And she kind of went off in a huff. And this sweet clerk followed her, and I could hear the sweet clerk saying, ma'am, it is on sale, and so forth and so on. And I thought, whoa, isn't this us? Isn't this me sometimes, where I'm actually upset about something that doesn't exist because I haven't even paid attention to the way that it actually is. So she asked that we lay down our weapons. And by weapons, I mean so much of what the conceptual mind carries around, trying to make us safe, trying to orient us in the world. A lot of that is our expectations. And a lot of it is our demands on things. A lot of it is our judgments upon ourselves and upon others that we carry. The Temple of Surrender asks that we lay these things down in order to go into it. Sometimes that's easy. It felt relatively easy for me to go, oh, they don't have any batteries. Oh, I can buy my battery, but I gotta buy a bunch of them. It felt like a relatively easy thing in that moment to surrender. But I felt a resistance, and the resistance is there. And there are situations where there requires a lot more to lay it down. In fact, sometimes you have to surrender to the fact you can't lay it down. sometimes surrender doesn't feel even accessible when you somehow know that it's what's required and you can't do it. Um, so I think these are holy moments. We have this thing we, for lack of a better word, called the ego. It's not our total sense of I, but it's this sense of I that likes to be in control, that believes that it's successful in life when it's able to get you what you want. And it doesn't particularly like to surrender. It resists surrender. And there's a way that, to enter the temple of surrender, we have to bow really low. I sometimes think that the entrance to the temple of surrender is like this little hole that you have to get down on your knees and crawl through. And your head has to be really low to the ground in some way for you to get into the temple. It's like the bowing is so necessary that, oh yes, I'm not in charge of the world. I'm not in complete control here. And even when it's about something that matters oh so dearly, we still have to do it. We still have to do it. I was noticing, being here in Seattle with my son and daughter-in-law and grandchild, a certain feeling of vulnerability that I feel, not just when I'm here, it's kind of somewhere in the background about my children, now my grandchildren, and how much it matters to me what happens to them or doesn't happen to them. And how I want everything to go well for them. I think that everyone can relate to this. You might not have children, but there's no doubt situations and people in your life that this fits with. And yet, they're their own agents. They make their own choices. They're adults now. Even when they weren't adults, there was actually pretty limited power sometimes over what you could do. And yet it still matters. And so there's this sort of situation of, and then to have this little being who's only, 18 months old. And it's such a joy to be around her, but you can feel in her very openness, such vulnerability, so impressionable, so, so open to joy, but also so open to sorrow and disappointment and frustration and the whole human thing. She's so open to it. And just it's instinctual on a certain level to just feel this love and protection of her. And yet, do I know I'm not the master of what happens to her in life? I don't know what her path is. I don't know what her parents' path is. I don't know what sort of things they might undergo in life. I know a little bit about even what's already happened. It was not an easy sort of postpartum for my daughter-in-law. And I saw how difficult that was. We were actually here for some of it. And it's like, so much of life is like that. And I believe it has a great deal to do with why we're here. I believe at the end of life, when I look back, I will see what I've accomplished, but I'll also see what I underwent and what was handed to me that perhaps I didn't want, and how that changed me, how that process changed me, and maybe not always for the better. That's a hard thing to say. I think there's a certain way that we want it always to be getting better and better. And I'm certainly right along in there. And why I have studied the Dharma and why I'm a Dharma teacher is I do think that there's a skillfulness that makes it work better. And yet, sometimes life throws us things that we don't know how to rise to. Sometimes life throws us things that can sink us for a long time. And I don't want to be naive about that. So, as I teach, as I offer what I know about skillfulness, what I know about how to meet reality and to reduce suffering, I, in a sense, have to bow humbly before the sense that I don't know always what's possible. And sometimes situations don't seem to be rightable, if I can put it that way, as if I know what's right. You know, we look at our lives personally, but we also look at the world and we see the things that are happening. We see the way things are going. And it's not clear they're all going to turn out right. You know, they're not going to turn out the way we want. They're not going to turn out the way we think they should. They're not going to even necessarily turn out with what are the wisest part of our hearts would want them to turn out to be. And here we are. This is our situation. So, the temple of surrender, entering the temple of surrender, we do it every day, many times. And then there are some passages in life where it really seems like it's completely up. Surrender is completely up. And sometimes we don't know what to do. And that too is a possibility of surrender. So, just thinking about this topic, I think one of the greatest sources of learning surrender to me has been other human beings. I once heard someone say, I couldn't tell you who, it was a trainer at one of these, psychotherapy trainings that I went to. And he said, nothing is as complex or difficult as another human being. Okay. I think he spoke the truth. It's really complex. And it's really our intimate relationships often that call on us to surrender. Because oddly enough, people are often going to be who they are. Now, that isn't to say we have no agency, that we can't say something, that we can't speak for our needs, that we can't leave a situation or whatever. There are often this things that can be done. And yet, often what I found as a parent, as a spouse, as a son, and those various kinds of generational things, that sometimes I have to bow. Yeah, sometimes I have to surrender to the way things are. So let me just pause a moment here. I want to give you a little moment to reflect. No doubt sometimes as I'm talking, you're doing your own reflecting, but I'm going to give a moment where I won't talk. And if you want to jot this down on a piece of paper, if you happen to have one handy, that could be good. Something to reflect on later. But the question that came to my mind was, what are you undergoing right now? It's a simple question. And you can list some things from the trivial to the profound. What does that touch in you right now, in your life right now? What are you undergoing? And then you don't have to do it for each of them. Just pick maybe the one that seems the most significant. How is that for you? How is that to be undergoing this right now? Third question. How do you need agency and surrender in this situation? Just a reflection on, what the doing side of it is, and what the not doing side of it is, the yielding or the accepting. All right. I suspect that you could probably work with these questions more this week if you'd like, if you find this helpful to just reflect in this way in a written form. Let's just add another example of mine here. Again, it's not too significant, but um, just something that I feel I'm undergoing today is not having coffee. This seems trivial again, but it's not. I had coffee 3 days in a row. I don't normally drink coffee. Coffee's not so good for me. I use it for special occasions. Um, and I find that the longer I use it, if I use it multiple days in a row, it has diminishing returns and increasing kinds of not good things that I don't like. So today I just stopped and had my green tea as usual. And I'm exploring what it's like to have a dopamine deficit, which is what this creates. It's why addictions work the way they do, is they like give you like a spurt of dopamine and it feels good, and then you have a little dip, and then then you have your coffee again, and then but you find that the what it brings you up to isn't the way it brought you up before, and more you're kind of reaching down into a hole to bring yourself up to base level rather than getting any better, and so forth. And this happens relatively quickly to me on coffee. And I must admit, it's the substance. I don't know why. It's the substance that I crave. And each time I have it, I watch this. And if I just have it one day and then stop for a few weeks, no problem. But it's the subsequent ones. And so today there's this kind of low. And I feel this kind of increased tendency to get frustrated. I feel like not as up to things. And I know it will pass. I've been through this many times, and that's probably the wisdom factor here, is that I have learned what this feels like. And if I could just have remembered it 2 days ago, as clearly as I'm remembering it now, I would have stopped after the initial cup of coffee. But I wanted to stay awake better on a day when I was jet lagged, and I thought it made more sense. But then I put up with the stomach. It tends to make my stomachs cramp in a certain way, and so there's the undergoing. And so I realized today I was actually doing the right thing, but it meant undergoing something I really don't like, this kind of feeling, which I'm pretty sure will be fine tomorrow.